This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry with agriculture broadcasters Orion Samuelson and Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH and your local Case IH dealer. We turn the page on the calendar. We look ahead to the new year now. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year to you. Welcome to This Week in Agribusiness. I'm here alongside Mr. Mike Pearson to take a look at what's coming down the road for the agriculture industry.
So much. Max, Happy New Year to you, by the way, and to all of our viewers. And yeah, there's mostly the same stuff we were dealing with in 2021, Max, is going to carry through into 2022. We've got challenges still with the supply chain. We've got waters of the U.S. concerned. We've got all sorts of things that agriculture is going to have to be paying attention to this year.
You know, quite often you'll hear people say, well, good riddance, glad it was over. But there were some good things that happened, too. As many producers would acknowledge, it wasn't all bad.
That's a great point. Yields, as we'll be talking a little bit, were pretty good for a lot of folks.
We'll talk with some of our farm broadcast colleagues over the next few minutes here on This Week in Agribusiness, among them Mike Adams, who for years has been a farm broadcaster. He hosted a program called Adams on Agriculture. Mike has retired now that we're in the new year, but I asked him to reflect back on what he thought about 2021.
Well, I think the supply chain issues certainly dominated things as that evolved, and we saw that it wasn't going to be so short term as they had talked about, and just questions going into next year already and into the new season. Will there be plenty of input available? What's the cost of it going to be? Are you going to plant more beans because you may not be able to get your corn acres ready? Those are the kind of questions farmers were dealing with and are dealing with. So I think it kind of really brings a lot of uncertainty into the spring of 2022 until we see how all that shakes out.
Did land prices, land uses, how land is used, come up on the show from time to time? You know, we see this push to have more energy generation from out on the farmland, along with continued rising land prices up into the stratosphere.
Yeah, land prices we never thought we would see, right. That's amazing and to watch that story. But the energy, the wind farms and the solar farms that are popping up in the landscape all over, I've often said I'm not against those forms of energy, but why do they have to take the best acres out of production? That's my concern. I hope we're never to a point where we're looking back and say, wow, we shouldn't have taken those acres out of production. I mean, I just think we take food production for granted. You know, we hear about South America expanding acres, bringing more acres into production, and we're taking acres out of production. So I have a concern about that, not about that we're going to some other forms of energy, but where we're placing it. It seems like there ought to be some hilltops and some pasture land that wasn't good for anything else. Maybe we could use those for, but I understand they do tests and they want to put them in certain areas. But I think that is a concern. I hope we monitor that moving forward.
Yeah, I think many of us would like to see the productivity, the crop productivity taken into consideration,
Yes.
Although we're very cognizant of the private property rights that cannot be ignored, the ability of the landowner to sell that land if he or she wants to.
I agree, and that's their choice. And I think you talk with farmers. It's a difficult choice sometimes for them, but for them it made sense financially for their operation, for their family. So yeah, I understand that certainly.
A lot of drought this past year. When you looked at that drought monitor map, it was jarring many weeks of the year. When you looked at the productivity, the productive areas that were affected by that, did that come up? A lack of rain?
Talked a lot about it. It was kind of the haves and have-nots when it came to moisture, and you looked at that western Corn Belt and how dry it was, and the eastern Corn Belt was getting the rain. You know, as I talk with farmers, they're very sensitive about issues like drought, because even if they're in areas where they're not in drought, they know it could be them next year. So they're very sensitive to that. So I would talk with farmers where they had rain, but they wanted to hear what was going on out west, because they knew and felt for those people very much. And then you go into a winter trying to catch up from a drought. It's pretty hard to do in the winter time. So there'll be a lot of moisture questions going into 2022 season as well.
The harvest wasn't without challenges. I mean, there was a good dry stretch, for
Right.
many producers, but there were areas where there was a lot of rain dumped in, some snow. You saw some ruts in the field, didn't you?
Saw some ruts in the field, and it was amazing how in one area farmers were well ahead of schedule, and not too far away, they were sitting and idling and waiting because just the way those fronts moved through, and it was so patchy. So what looked like at one point was going to be a really early harvest for a lot of farmers, all of a sudden kind of dragged on for a while. And I know in central Illinois, for example, we're used to having harvest done by November for sure, and to see farmers still harvesting, still in the fields, working at night well into November is kind of unusual, kind of like the old days almost.
Washington, it had to come up often on your show. What did the farmers tell you? What did farm organization leaders share with you about the dramatic shift in Washington? A huge shift when it comes to the various regulatory agencies, the White House, members of Congress.
A lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions, I think a lot of concerns, and in some cases frustrations, especially on biofuels. What are the policies of this administration? As we've seen with previous administrations, kind of playing fast and loose at times with the RFS, and I know the ethanol and biodiesel industry is feeling they're not sticking to the law on that. Still waiting for information, in many cases late. It's hard to plan for the industry that way. Questions, what are taxes going to be like? What changes might be coming? And I think agriculture is placed in an interesting situation. Infrastructure improvements that agriculture has pushed for such a long time were in the infrastructure bill. But when you look at other spending that goes along with it on other programs, does it make the price tag almost too high? And how are you going to pay for that? And what will there be tax changes along the way that will impact them and maybe offset the advantages of the infrastructure improvements? So I think it's been a year of just uncertainty and not sure what might lie ahead yet. And inflation, I think, is a big concern. Where are we headed with that? A lot of farmers remember what it's like to go through inflationary times and hoping we don't go back to those days.
Mike, at the end of 2021, retired, but he'll share some memories over his lengthy career in farm broadcasting. He'll be along to join us once more as we continue here on This Week in Agribusiness.